I'd like to say a few words. First is to welcome you all to the Sudanese Programme event, which is unfortunately, with what's happening in the Sudan at the moment, is a tragic, but also extremely worrying for the future. Our hearts goes and sympathy to those who were killed unnecessarily by the soldiers on both sides, as well as our sympathy goes for those people who lost their home, they lost their possessions, and the looting of their property is really unheard of, and I never heard this before. Since 1965, never thought that Sudanese could do something like this. I'm not saying ordinary Sudanese, but the army could turn against each other and against the innocent civilians. It's unbelievable. So we'll say Baraka Fikum for those people who sadly died and killed, as I said, unnecessarily in the fight between the Rapid Support Force as well as the regular Sudanese army. Now, in particular, I would like to thank the presenters with us, Dr. Sarah Abdi, Dr. Amira Osman, and also Iman Baldo, who is with us there. Munzoul, you see that he is online. I thank my colleagues, Richard Baltrop, whom you have seen before, he is co-chairman, and also thank to Caroline Davis, who's been working very hard on this conference for some time, doing all the technical side. Dr. Eugene Rogan, who is the director of the Middle East Center, very kindly agreed to collaborate with the Middle East Center, and he offered this for us to hold the conference. I like also the staff of St. Antony's College, as usual, always, they are very helpful and kind in attending to the needs, what you call the chef, the Sudanese. So whenever I saw him last week, he said, don't worry, I know what I'm supposed to do. So you don't need to tell me what sort of food I have to prepare for the Sudanese. Now, we hope that the conference, provide a platform for discussion, apart from the speakers, the three speakers and Munzoul, but also from the audience. There will be an open session at the end for anybody who wants to express. And in particular, Jeff Roon here, and also Khulud Khair, maybe say something. She had been to Khartoum and she left after the fighting or before the fighting. Is that right, Khulud? After. So, we'll have what they call Shahid Ayan, somebody who's been there in person who could, from near, not from afar. So we are very glad, that these contributions. So please do remember that the last session is an open session for anybody who wants to express their feeling. So I welcome you all and thank you very much for coming, not only from Oxford, but from outside Oxford. Munzoul? Thank you very much, Munzoul.
I think I will go without the camera because the connection is not stable.
Munzoul, thank you very much for volunteering to talk to us in the present very difficult circumstances. And we are thankful to you, as well as the audience, for taking part in this conference. And we hope to have a kind of a window of what's happening, particularly on the social side. We are going to have speakers on politics, but let us have your view on what's happening socially, this fractured society of Sudan, how it's going to proceed in the future. So I leave that to Munzoul for you, okay?
Thank you very much, Ahmed, for organizing this and for inviting me. And I hope the network would allow me to say the few things that I would like to say. Now, as someone who witnessed the start of the war on the 15th, and like many other Sudanese, went through very difficult times. And if I may just reflect on some personal experiences that I had, that might give you an idea about the extent of the humanitarian crisis as a result of this war. On the 15th, I was outside my home. I took my daughter to the university. And then just 15 minutes later, she called me to say that the lecture was canceled, and she asked me to go and get her home. This was about 8:30 in the morning. So I rushed to get her home, and then I had a meeting at 9 a.m. I brought her home. I left for the meeting. The meeting was actually not far from home. It was like 10 minutes drive. I was there, the meeting started, and just 10 minutes later, we heard the loud explosions. And I rushed home, trying to get back to the family. But unfortunately, I live just very close to where the two military generals are living. That's Hay al-Matar. I couldn't get in because already the road was blocked. So I had to spend the night in Khartoum 2, which was just like 1 kilometer from where I live. In the morning, I tried to get back to my family, walking. I left my car. I was about to get shot by the rapid support forces, so I had to go back. In the afternoon, my wife, she took the kid and drove out. They stopped them, they searched them, but they didn't harm them. We spent the 2 nights in Khartoum 2. When the fighting continued, we had to leave the area because that was also a combat area. We went further south. We put ourselves into a hotel. We spent 4 nights. There were no electricity. The water was running short. The food was running short. So we decided to leave, and we left everything. We took the bus to Port Sudan, where we currently are. Normally, the journey from Khartoum to Port Sudan takes like 11 hours. It took us 3 days to get there because public transport was not easy to get. And we had to spend a night in Madani, another night in Gadarif, and then the 3rd day we went to Port Sudan. This is a personal experience that might give you some idea about what was happening. Now, in the humanitarian front, of course, Khartoum was the most devastated city. Then comes Jinena, that was even worse, and then Niala, and then Zalinje. Al-Fashir also had some problems, but relatively better if compared to Khartoum and Jinena and Zalinje. Now, from Khartoum, you must have been following all that's coming in the news, that people are leaving the city, basically to neighboring states like Jazeera in Wad Madani, and to White Nile, and then the Blue Nile, and then to the east, Gadarif, Kasra, and Port Sudan. These were actually the key towns that received internally displaced persons. And of course, people also left to neighboring countries like Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. And I think even the Central African Republic also received some people who left South Darfur. So a serious crisis is unfolding. And those who, for some reasons, were unable to leave their homes, they were subjected to terrible incidents of looting. Some even got killed. Properties were taken, cars were stolen, and all of that. But the most serious situation that is facing people in these towns, and in Khartoum in particular, is that life is becoming very difficult because basic services are not there. Water is not there. Electricity is not there in most part of the city. There is a serious problem of cash. The war took people by surprise. People have money in the banks, but they couldn't access banks. Food stocks are depleting. Some of the factories that produce food were either bombed by the Sudan armed forces or looted or burnt down by people who took advantage of the situation. The last time people got their salaries was March. So there is a serious problem that people might actually starve because they don't have cash and there is no food. And the situation is deteriorating as we speak. Now, one of the things that are also alarming is that the capacity of the neighboring states, like the Jazeera state, the White Nile state, and other states to accommodate the IDPs is quite limited. And pressure has already been put on these cities like Madani, Port Sudan, Gadarif, and Kasla. We also see rising rent prices. People cannot afford to pay rents, and people don't have money anyway. Those who try to cross the borders are also facing a very difficult situation. And you must have been following the news that Egypt has imposed visa on all Sudanese, while previously some categories are exempt from the entry visa requirement. Now they are all required to have visa. And to get the visa to Egypt sometimes it takes like a month or even more with these new regulations and restrictions. I'm not sure about the other countries. Ethiopia, for instance, I also see that there are some restrictions and not everybody can afford to get entry visa to those countries. So we have a very difficult situation, and even more so is in the two states of Darfur, West Darfur, Jenaina, and Central Darfur, Zalinje. And what makes this situation difficult is that telecommunications are down in these two states, in West Darfur and Central Darfur, and very little actually is coming out. And we don't know the extent of the situation, of the difficulties that people are going through. But what comes from Chad is that more than 100 people crossed the border to Eastern Chad as refugees. And one of the things that also complicates the situation even further is that we don't have a functioning government at the moment. Whatever form of government was there before the war completely disappeared. We don't see the Minister of Interior, who disappeared, who was actually dismissed, he was replaced, but even the new one isn't to be seen anywhere. The police has completely disappeared from the streets, giving, the space for criminals to loot, transact, and do all the sort of things that are reported in the media. We have three ministers who are relocated for Sudan: the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Health, and the Minister of Social Development. But all they could do is to receive humanitarian aid and medical supplies. I think there is nothing that they could do beyond that. So in these circumstances, there is a need to have some sort of a crisis government. I have no idea how that could be done, but at least such a government could facilitate the distribution of humanitarian relief and try also to make sure that basic services are restored, like electricity and water and telecom systems. I don't know how this could be done, but there is a need, because the existing vacuum is one of the factors that contribute to the suffering of people. So there is a need for a government to do the regular things that a government does, What the government at the state levels are doing are quite limited. And this war actually exposed the whole federal system in the country, that we really don't have a real federal system. We have a very centralized system whereby everything is in Khartoum. And when Khartoum is not functioning, nothing else functions. I think this is something that needs to be considered. And if there is one lesson from this war, is that what we have cannot be described as a federal system, because the states are supposed to be independent, but they are not. They are unable even to pay salaries for those people who are working at the state levels, let alone at the federal levels. So this is the situation. This is how it looks. And unfortunately, the two fighting groups, the Rapid Support Forces and Sudan Armed Forces, failed to observe any truce or short-term ceasefire that they signed in Jeddah. And as we speak, there is a ceasefire, a very short one, a 24-hour ceasefire has started this morning. Not sure whether they would observe it or not, but the fact that these warring parties' inability to or unwillingness to observe whatever they sign exacerbates the humanitarian situation. And my feeling as a Sudanese who went through all this is that something more needed to be done. I don't think what we see in Jeddah or all the other efforts that are now coming out are sufficient to force these people to get into a credible and a verifiable ceasefire, because that's the only way to alleviate the humanitarian suffering that the Sudanese people are subjected to. The fear is that if this is not happening, then we might see the war extending to other parts of the country, and God forbid, we might even see a very serious civil war that would end up dismembering what remains of Sudan. I think I'll stop here, and if there are questions or comments as we move on, I would be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Munzoul, for this rather depressing, but the reality of what's happening to the Sudanese is unbelievable. But thank you very much for expanding to us on the social and particularly the economic side and the need for a solution to the problem. So I will open the discussion. Anybody want to ask a question? Could you identify yourself, please?
Good morning, Munzoul. This is Jeff Holden, your former teacher from Dartmouth Secondary School here. I just wanted to ask you, could you tell us a little bit about how things are in Port Sudan at the moment, please?
Thank you very much. Yes, the second, Nazar, please.
Hi, good morning, Munzoul. My name is Nazar Yusuf Al-Tahir from Sudanese Community Oxford. Yeah. My question, can you shed a light on the NGOs and the civil society and their ability to help in this situation during the absence of the central government? How we can establish networking with them here from UK to help? Thank you.
Thank you. Any further? Yes, Jill?
Thank you. My name is Jill Lusk. I'm sort of journalist, retired. Thank you, Munzoul, for a very heartfelt and interesting and sad account. A number of people have asked me, and so I'm asking you, why is Port Sudan being spared some of the attacks that are happening elsewhere? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Professor Munzoul. It's Rosalind Marsden here. It's very good to hear your voice, and I'm very relieved to hear that you and your family are safe, despite the terrible ordeal that you've been through, that you've just described. I had one question. You mentioned that you don't think that the efforts being made at the moment by the international and regional community are sufficient to get these generals to change their calculations, and you said that something more needed to be done. I don't know if you could perhaps elaborate on what you think does need to be done to have more impact.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Muhammad Saleh Muhammad Yasin. Thank you, Munzoul, for this update. From your interventions, 2 points struck me, which was predicted before. It was that the war or this confrontation was not something came from nothing, but it is accumulation and this prediction. You mentioned that there is no federal system, there is no system. Do you think this war could, or this confrontation could stimulate more decentralization, building of a new governance system in Sudan, and maybe decentralize more towards the marginalized areas, and these areas before were lacking this electricity, now which is lacking Khartoum, water which is lacking Khartoum, and this could maybe wake up the people. The second thing is you are talking about the people fleeing the war. It's not necessary for them to ask for visas. When you escape the war, why do you think that people are focusing on visa? So people can escape the war and can go to the neighboring countries. So what do you think the perspective of the neighboring countries and the international community can play on this in order to alleviate the suffering? Thank you.
Thank you. Munzoul, yeah, I'll leave you to answer these questions, please, Munzoul.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jeff Holden. And for those who don't know, Jeff was my high school teacher in Sudan back in the 80s. So I'm glad that you attended this. Well, for Sudan, it's relatively safe. There were some rapid support forces when the war started, but they were few in numbers, so they were easily driven out of the city. The city is safe, but it's getting crowded, and also it's getting very expensive, especially when it comes to accommodation. People are having real difficulty in getting places to live in. And some people were sheltered in some schools and so on and so forth. And the problem is that now the weather is really getting terrible. And Sudan is famous for having a very bad summer, June, July, and August until September is very difficult. But for now, it's fine. Nazar, NGOs and civil society, under the circumstances, it's very difficult actually for civil society to deal with the situation, or at least to contribute in the humanitarian front, because it's not safe to move around. It's not safe to do anything. So unless there is a credible and verifiable ceasefire, I don't think civil society has any chance, at least to deal with the humanitarian situation. Probably the civil society could do something on the political front. But even on that one, I don't see how, because as we speak, there are a lot of initiatives, and every 5 or 6 people or civil society organizations come out with an initiative that, does very little by way of addressing these things politically. Probably the different initiatives needs to come together so that the civil society and other political actors speak with one voice. If that happens, they might be able to do something. Jill, why for Sudan is safe? I think I answered this. The war hasn't extended there, at least for now. We don't know whether this will continue like this, or probably the situation will change. For Dan Marsden, what the international community can do more than what they're hitherto doing, I think they could do. They could put more pressure on the two fighting generals. I think the international community can do more to protect civilians, and I'm quite sure you know more than me the mechanisms that could be deployed to address this. But I don't think just watching these 2 generals killing people and dismembering the country while trying just to have these soft talks on them, I don't think that's gonna work. Muhammad Saleh, the war is, yes, of course, it has been building for a very long time. This is not something that just happened on the 15th, and we have all followed that. Probably the speakers that will follow might address some of the political dimensions. But here, what I can say is that this has been going on. It was building up for a long time. And we have seen that the supporters of the former regime, since February and March, they came publicly out and they say that they're going to sabotage the framework agreement by all means necessary. And this is exactly what happened. And yes, I agree with you that this war should make us think about a genuine federal system whereby the center should not control everything. And if anything happened to the center, then the rest of the country will not be affected the way it was affected this time. And for the visa for people, you say that people are refugees, they shouldn't be talking about visas. I think we need to be cautious here, because some countries are not signatories to the Geneva Convention of 1951. I'm not sure whether Egypt is signatory to that convention or not. And if it's not the signatory, then it has the right to impose visas. But whether it is a signatory or not, effectively, Egypt is now not allowing Sudanese to get into Egypt. Egypt knows that these people are running out of fear for their lives, but still it's not welcoming them. So that is what I can say here. Thank you.
Thank you. Munzoul, I think there may be some question from the people on Zoom. Yeah. Richard is going to let you know the questions, please. Yeah.
Munzoul, I'll pick out 2 questions from those online. one question from Thomas Nordberg is, do you have any comment on the ongoing negotiations in Jeddah? And the second question from Matai Munna, a master's student in Oxford, is, can you say anything further about your idea of a crisis government, the solution, the government itself, or the role of EGAD or others in it? So would you like to respond to those two questions, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I think for the Jeddah negotiations, I see that the US and Saudi Arabia are keen to have these negotiations succeed. But unfortunately, very little is known about the negotiations. They're very ambiguous, they're very obscure, and the African Union and the IGAD are not happy about how these negotiations are conducted, and they feel that they are being excluded from the negotiations. This is one. Two, so far, the negotiations started in the 6th of May, and up to now, the negotiators are always the Rapid Support Force and Sudan Armed Forces, and they are holding indirect, they never met up to now. So one feels that little success has been achieved so far, and probably the US and Saudi Arabia need to expand the mediation to include others that are important, like the African Union and the IGAD, and probably even the UN. My idea of a crisis government, actually, this is not my own idea. It's an idea of a group called the National Mechanism for Stopping the War and Restoring Democracy. They are the ones who I was part of that at the beginning. They were actually the ones who brought the idea of having a crisis government to fill the vacuum, and probably even to be some sort of a buffer between the two fighting generals. I don't know how this government is going to be formed. Who would be? Of course, they are talking about qualified, independent, cabinet members, or probably technocrats or something of that sort. But still, the idea is not very clear, and I don't know how they're going to be about that, and also whether they would be allowed to function by the fighting generals or not.
Thank you. Any further question from the floor?
Okay.
Yes, James.
My name is James Morton. I worked in Darfur in the 1980s. Two questions. If you don't want to answer this one, don't. But could you give an indication? Is somebody winning, somebody losing, or is it still a completely equal battle?
Chaos.
And the other one is, are the standard political parties, the NCP, the Umar, making any effort to get involved, possibly through the crisis government that you were suggesting? Thank you.
Okay, Munzoul?
Yes.
Yes.
The first question, is anyone winning or is anyone losing? Since 1956, there isn't a single instance where the army won over a rebel group. Equally, there isn't a single instance where a rebel won a battle over the army. All the wars that the Sudanese has fought ended by negotiations, and this is not going to be an exception. And that's why the earlier they sit around the table and find a solution, the better. Because if it continues for 2, 3 months, 4 months, 10 years, at the end of the day, they will have to sit down and negotiate something. And I think if this is the case, they should be doing it right now, instead of just allowing for more destruction and humanitarian suffering.
Good. Yeah, Munzoul, I just want to follow up this question. If I am allowed just a few minutes, and that is when I went to Sudan 1965, after the collapse of the Aboud regime, the distribution of ministerial position was absolutely abysmal. There is one minister from Darfur, one minister from the east, and 2 ministers from the south. And this is where the power deficit it has historical root, the grievances of Darfurian and even in the East to the present time. So that wasn't really right. And I think in relation to Mohammed saying what other alternative government should be pursued in order to satisfy or at least to address the grievances of the East and West. The South has gone their own way. Don't you think that the Sudan is heading for further fragmentation?
Absolutely. If the kind of grievances you are referring to are not addressed, we are heading into terrible directions. And if the war isn't stopped, we are actually heading directly to a serious civil war that might end up dismembering the country. So the hope is that as terrible as it is, this war is a lesson for us that we need to address all those grievances in a way that would spare us further fragmentation and further death and destruction.
Thank you, Munzoul. I think maybe further a few questions, please.
So there are many more questions online. So one question, Munzoul, is from Aziza Noor online asking, do you have any suggestions about how civil society could unite to talk in one voice? Another question from Peter Schumann is about the US and Saudi Arabia leading the mediation or negotiations. And he says that there's no sign that those negotiators or mediators are legitimized by Sudanese civil society. And then a third question I'll pick out is from Khartoum Abu Saina, asking about, do you have any comments on the potential impact on agriculture if fighting continues? And sorry, fourth question, pick any of them, from Hamid Khalafana. Should we worry about the potential ethnic and tribal dimensions of escalating conflict? Over to you, Munzoul. Thank you.
Munzoul?
Yeah, we've temporarily lost Munzoul.
Yes, we've been warned by him. I was warned by him that, you know, the internet may come and go, so to speak. But at least we are very lucky to hear his presentation and some of his answer to the question some of you have raised. Really very pertinent question to the what's happening now at the present time. I think I may just also add, I think part of the problem here is the politicians. Not only their cooperation with the army, which is absolutely appalling, under al-Bashir as well, under al-Burhan at the moment, but also during Numeri's regime. It's those people who are not attending to the ordinary people outside Khartoum. Khartoum is very much obsessed with its own power, but they don't look at the countryside to see what's happening there, what are the needs in the countryside, to this very day. And, you know, that is a real problem for future Sudanese, to say traditional political parties are no longer really attend to these things. They don't have constitution, they don't have any root into the countryside any longer. 40 years, 50 years ago, yes, but not now. People are having different perspective about their life and their future. So, you know, politicians have to address these questions. If any kind of semblance of getting together, which for the time being is out of the question. I don't see how Darfurian are going to, you know, what they call Nas al-Bahar, Gharraba and Nas al-Bahar come together. It's a very, very difficult issue.